Thank you for joining us for today's DIR Shared Technology Services Managed Security Services webinar. My name is Carrie Davey. I am the MSI Communications Manager, and I will hand over now to Neil Pierce.
Thank you, Carrie. I like it when you start off that introduction. So, we are happy that everybody could kind of extend your summer vacations or work around us. I know just to come here and listen to this. But this is actually one of our final service offerings that we haven't presented yet. This will wrap up almost every service offering that we provide in Shared Technology Services. Today, we have Patrick Robertson, we have Gene Moore, and Mark Cooper, and they are going to present us with the rest of the managed security services that were not presented back in April. So if you're interested in the full suite, we want you to encourage you to look back at some of the April webinar. And then today's webinar, we'll finish that up with incident response and risk and compliance. After they're finished, we're going to talk a little bit about just to show you how to get more information from the external portal. And then Carrie's going to wrap it up with our monthly webinars. So with that, we'll get started.
Good. Well, Neil, thank you very much for having us. Carrie, thanks for the hospitality once again. I am Patrick Robinson. I work for AT&T, and my primary mission is to help support this contract in the form of education and information. So it's my job to help you understand all of the features and all of the capabilities and how you can take full advantage of it. Gene, do us a favor and introduce yourself.
Appreciate that, Pat. My name is Gene Moore. And I'll ditto everything Pat said from a education onboarding standpoint. I've been involved in technology, business continuance, incident response, etc. for about 25 years. And if anybody needs anything anywhere along the way, that's why I'm here. So I appreciate being with you all today.
All right, and thank you. Yeah, I'm Mark Hooper. I'm new to the team, but I'll be doing a lot of those same activities that were mentioned by my colleagues earlier. I've got about 24 years of experience managing and delivering security assessments and services. Also 2 years as a former criminal investigator doing digital forensics, which I know we'll be talking about a little bit later today. That's my background.
Mark, thanks a lot. Thanks. Welcome to AT&T, by the way. While you may be new to us, you're an old man in the world of information security.
Oh, man. Feel that old.
Yeah. 24 years times 7, right? It's like dog years. You know?
Bath by fire, baby.
Yeah, so you're 100 and something years of experience. We're gonna pick your brain in a little bit about digital forensics, but let's move on to just a high-level overview here. As Neil referenced, back in April, we covered security monitoring and device management services and did kind of a high-level overview of those services. Today, we're going to focus on incident response and risk and compliance. And as you can see in our little box, I promise not to read it to you. If you're eligible for these services or want to be eligible for these services, here's how you go about getting signed up. So, Neil, I think we can look at the next page. We drew straws, and I got the short one, so I get to read the obligatory disclaimer. Gene and Mark and I are going to be talking about different ideas and different solutions with respect to these services, but we're not talking about a specific customer. So if you would like us to interact with you directly, we have a process for that. It's called the request for solution. That's how you'll log in and request more information, a formalized architect and design and solution, and a cost proposal for that. Also, something else we're not going to do today, Mark and I are going to talk about experiences we've had in the industry over years, but we're not going to name names, we're not going to call out customers, because that's all very privileged and private information. So Neil, let's hop on over to the categories. Of the 4 categories, the 2 on the left we covered in April, the 2 on the right, incident response, risk and compliance, we're going to cover today. We're going to talk, at the very least, we're going to touch on 3 key elements for every one of these services. What is it? How does it work? And why do I need it? And then we'll provide a little elaboration around each one of those. So the first 3 services we're going to cover are in the portfolio called Incident Response Services. So Mark, let's talk a little bit about Incident Response Preparedness. So This is going to sound tongue-in-cheek, but then I established a reputation, so I need to keep it up. Why would you want to be prepared for an incident?
Yeah, I think this is a really important service here. Being prepared for an incident helps you eliminate some of the problems that you can have. It limits the breadth of the incident. Helps you kind of understand your communications plan, who you're reaching out to, what kind of actions you're going to take. This service helps you build your playbook, your policies, your procedures, your processes, your run books, again, your comms plan. So it's important to be prepared because everybody has security events and everybody has security incidents at some point. It's important that you know what to do so you can mitigate that as quickly as possible and get back to operating efficiently.
Yeah, wasn't it Mike Tyson that got quoted saying, everybody's got a plan until you're punched in the face?
Yes,
That's true.
So, yes, and if you don't have a plan, life gets a little more complicated if you don't have a plan and you get punched in the face.
That's true.
So some of the things I think we can do, Gene, we talk about being able to develop a plan, but then how do you know it's a good one?
Well, you need to test it. You need to go out and try it, and once you build the plan, right? So one of the biggest questions that I hear is that can we prepare for everything? Well, the answer is no. But a lack of preparedness and a lack of plan means you can't respond appropriately to anything. So you need to look at the commonalities, look at a kind of track record of what's happening, and try to prepare the best you can to be able to react to whatever happens. If you can cover 75% of the playing field, then you know what is going on when you do it. And then once you actually build a preparedness plan, then there's some things you can do, whether you're talking, desktop exercises or whatever you need to do from a preparedness standpoint. But I think one of the all-time best lines I've heard, and this was just recently, and I'm going to steal this from Mark because it was his line. But preparedness always costs more than remediation. So go ahead and do it up front. Flip-flop that. You're right. It was your line. That's why it's your line. See, right? That's like,
gotta get it right.
You gotta steal it. You gotta get it right. So remediation is
that,
always more than
it's going to be part of
Hey,
And thus ends the broadcast.
hey, I'm okay. I've stepped in it many times, so don't worry about it. But it always costs more. So go ahead and do the homework up front. Get your preparedness out of the way.
Yeah.
And it'll reap benefits.
To your point, Gene, Atlanta, Georgia, $18.1 million to date in hard costs to remediate the malware attack. Baltimore, Maryland, $11.5 million. Mark's right. You're right. It is way more expensive to prepare than to react.
And I think also there's this sort of perception that it's painful, right? So think about it like going to the doctor for a physical, right? Nobody likes to do it. Nobody likes to have a conversation about things that are uncomfortable, their habits, how they eat, But getting that baseline and understanding that there may be some gaps in that profile that would cause a problem later, and addressing them early is way cheaper than going on an ambulance to the hospital or paying an ER bill. It's the same thing. Preparing early and being prepared for an event it's important because remediation is expensive.
Well, and that's why you need to, it's so important to put the plan and do some actions. In other words, you don't prepare and then stick it in a book, set it to the side, because if you do that, there's no way you're going to actually identify those gaps you're talking about, which ultimately it's not that people don't have technologies or don't have the ability to address something. Generally, incidents that happen or attacks, whatever you want to call it, those happen in the seams, in the in-between. And that's the gaps. And that's what's so crucial to locate.
Yeah, ransomware doesn't come at you when you're most ready for it, between 8 and 5 when you're at full staff.
Right.
So knowing how to react in a difficult situation. And Gene, I opened a book recently, and we just did a quick scan through the book and found 3 of the critical people that were listed as points of contact didn't work for the organization anymore. So it's a living document. It needs to be continually evaluated and updated and addressed, because who are you going to call? You better make sure they still work for you.
Better know where the Ghostbusters are when you need them.
Exactly. Exactly. There was another war story I'll share with the group. In 2018, I had a front row seat on two separate incidences that were running more or less in parallel. One was a textbook case of what Mark describes, a well-organized, well-prepared organization. It was a 911 facility that became flooded with calls. And when calls flood into a 911 facility, you can't answer legitimate calls. And this was a serious problem. So they invoked their incident response plan, which brought on a series of partners and vendors and technologies in a very orderly and logical way. And what I took away from the whole experience was, in 48 hours, we solved the problem. And it was no one person's fault. It was a problem that the collective worked together to solve. And it was the most seamless, professional, and thorough incident response I think I've ever been part of. We did an after action, and we spent a few hours talking about what we did right, what we could have done better. We learned from it, updated and documented the process for the next event. The other one was the exact opposite. It was another entity, not to be named or mentioned, but they didn't have an incident response plan. And to Gene's observation earlier, when someone in network operations spotted some anomalous behavior on the network, there wasn't a plan, there wasn't a chain of command, there wasn't anything to do. So this guy did just what his instinct said. He called a friend, not an employee, not his manager, a friend. Well, the friend had a friend. And the friend had a sales rep at a technology company. And in less than 8 hours, this technology company, with the permission of one single person, had actually installed some software on the network to try to find the problem. They were so excited to have this entity as a potential customer, they flew a sales engineer into the city the next day, who shows up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and no one knows who he is. Nobody knows why he's there. And as people begin to roll in, they realize that they have some unauthorized software running through their network, and this has broken every protocol and every approval inside the entire organization. And as the software engineer explained to me later, he sat in a room next to the senior leadership of this entity for an hour and a half as they screamed and shouted and cursed and blamed each other. And at the end of it, the senior executive came in and sent the engineer home with an apology. He was profoundly embarrassed that this had put them both in this awkward situation. And at the end of the day, the sales engineer comes home, and I asked him the question, so you fixed it, right? And he goes, no, never did fix it. So it was a complete disaster. The problem, there was no procedure, no process, no chain of command, a total train wreck for an entity of over 1 million people. Just simply inexplicable that something like that could happen. But as Mark and I have talked, that happens more than we might imagine.
Yeah.
So Mark, how about you? You've encountered a few head-on collisions out there in the world.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've seen often, and too often, is when you have an incident and you don't have a plan, you don't necessarily have an incident commander or leader, and you've got a bunch of people wanting to help, right? So you've got people from infrastructure coming in, people from other vendors, and there's no real leadership in that incident. It can cause problems because decisions get made poorly, and sometimes not collaboratively. For instance, when you're troubleshooting something like this, you try to eliminate certain things, right? And you go through this flow, right? The playbook of the things you're supposed to do. Was it the firewall that did this? No, okay, we know that's not it. Start eliminating things out of the way. If you got people, to your point, that are putting things in the network under duress, things happen. You do cause denial of service for it could be email, right? We're going to put this email security thing in there because we're getting phished. Okay, well, that can cause a problem. Disabling a service account because you think it's the offending party. Well, you disable a service account, but maybe you don't know exactly what that account does, causes all sorts of problems downstream. So not only are you having an issue with an outside entity causing you problems, you're also causing problems to yourself. So that's why I think I've seen that numerous times.
Well, on that happy topic, now that we've broken into a network and caused damage, let's talk about the incident response services. So this kind of presumes that something untoward has happened at the customer site. So now we're in a situation where we need help we know we need help, and we need to call for help. So inside of the STS context, there is a way to request help in one of two different ways, and we'll discuss that here in a couple of slides. But incident response services is when you engage us to come help you do just what Mark was describing. We run the playbook, we do the troubleshooting, we identify the offensive behavior or technology or environment, and we begin to take actions on those specific items. So Mark, that's kind of what you were talking about. You walked into that situation once where your first day on the job had a full-blown incident, day one. So you brought in outside help?
Oh, absolutely. We brought in outside vendors to help us out. We had our own response team. We had our own playbook that we were following. And it ran the gamut, right? So it was detecting where did this come from? How many people are affected? How widespread is it? Let's triage this. Respond and contain. Very quickly, and again under a lot of duress because we knew something was happening, and it took us, a better part of a day or two to understand the breadth of the incident, but we contained it really quickly.
So a question for you then, along those lines, if you were a firefighter and you arrived at the scene of a fire, you would assess the situation and then make a conscious determination how to fight that fire.
Sure.
In a digital world where everything's almost completely invisible, how do you do that? How do you act like a firefighter so quickly to assess and the situation?
Yeah, so you may bring, just like firefighters, you may bring specialized equipment to that, to that incident, right? Okay. So you may bring in a tool to help you understand what's happening on the network. That'll look for something that's, responding other than you think. It should be some suspicious activity. You may bring forensics tools to help you understand what's happening at a deeper level. I know we're going to talk about forensics in a little bit. You bring specialized people depending on what's going on. You do a lot of user interviews. Who's in charge of this part of the network, who understands this, so just a lot of intel gathering right up at the front.
So like a firefighter then, you show up with a truck, euphemistically, a truckload of specialized equipment.
Right. To
help assess the situation. Okay, and that's all encompassed in the scope of work we develop for the customer when they engage with us? Okay. Well, you mentioned digital forensics. Let's touch on that just for a couple of minutes, because now we're at the point where an incident has happened of some type, and we have a device or devices that we need to investigate. And so now this to me is more like CSI Miami, or the police department shows up.
Sure.
So we've got a laptop or a server or something like that. And you've got direct personal experience with this. You've done this for a living. So tell us a little bit about what the customer might expect. What is it? How does it work? What would an experience be like in digital forensics?
So just to back up really quickly, in your incident response, typically you're going to have a root cause analysis. You're going to kind of understand where things came from, where to start looking, right? As you move into forensics, now you're looking for more specifics. So if we knew that this attack came from here, let's pull these laptops, or let's pull these servers, these hard drives. Let's get a forensically valid sample from that, and make sure that we have the right level of evidence and start investigating those things. It's kind of like any other investigation. You're following a rabbit down the hole, using information that you've gathered throughout the incident, or if you're just coming in from the forensic standpoint, you're asking a lot of questions up front with the what happened, where do I start looking, kind of thing.
Cool. So, Gene, you and I were having a lighthearted conversation the other day about laptops and digital forensics.
Yes. So basically, when you show up to work and you have a bunch of North Koreans running out of your laptop?
Yeah, that's a bad thing, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely a bad thing. So, during that response, you got to know what to do, how to do it, bring in the expertise to fix that problem. and fix that exercise. That's something that most of our customers generally don't have. And I'm guessing that most of the folks on this phone call probably don't know what to do. That is what this MSS contract is all about.
Yeah, Gene, you bring up a good point. Don't know what to do. Is everyone familiar with the rules of chain of custody? No? Mark and I were talking about that night before last. If we have an incident that is going to either end up in some administrative, behavioral, a disciplinary action, or possibly a criminal action, now chain of custody becomes all important.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got to have forensically sound evidence. And so if you break the chain of custody somewhere, that won't hold up in a court. Or it'll be called into question in court. You have to answer a lot of questions. Where did that hard drive go? Or where did that piece of evidence go for so long? Who was handling that? So you've got to have the right people. When you're talking about litigation support, you're talking about digital evidence. You got to have, hash values that match. And again, that's something that's forensically sound and will hold up in a criminal case or in a court case.
Well, and Mark, you and I were talking a little bit about, depending upon what the information is, we may be talking about storing that information, keeping it handy, right? Because you may have litigation, for instance, if it's a termination type of an environment, or it may need to be treated different if it is HIPAA required type information, right, for your health care, et cetera. So those type of things, so you have to have different plans. And again, and I know this is maybe taking a step back a little bit, but again, it all boils down to the preparedness. The more information you can have in your plan coming up front, for instance, when you do find that laptop, when you got all the North Koreans coming running out of it, what do I do? Well, when you show up with your specialized equipment to do what you need to do with your team, where do you go? Who do you talk to? How do you solve this problem? If you're in your documentation, in your plan, if you just simply have who does what, who is in charge of what, it basically is like a firefighter. You walk in and go, oh, down here 2 rooms to the right is the server organization. I know where they are. I need to talk to Bob Smith. That simple information will save you a ton of pain later on in the process.
I think that's exactly right. So, this preparedness doesn't have to be complex at first, especially if it's just low maturity or maybe you're a smaller entity.
Right.
Just knowing where to go or who to call. Maybe you're just calling an outside vendor, right? And these things grow. As you continue to practice this and mature this, your plan will grow with it.
So this entire discussion today, probably one of the main points, the takeaways that we want to have people meet is that it's all symbiotic. Everything connects. Start with the preparedness, do it as best as you can, and everything will naturally flow out of that.
That's a perfect summation, Gene. Thanks. Yeah, it's all symbiotic. Neil, before we move on to the next section, I do want to take a moment to get an absolute shameless plug in for the STS portal, because for our audience who's listening who does not have an IAC or an ILC in place, that's the interagency agreement or the interlocal agreement. That's your agreement by and between your organization and DIR. When you have that document in place, then these services are immediately available to you. Think of joining the Incident Response Country Club. So if you get that document in or check to make sure your organization has it, there's no cost, there's no commitment, there's no obligation. But as Gene said, if you open up a laptop and a bunch of North Koreans spill out, at least you know who to call.
Yes, and we'll talk more about that after you present your
awesome.
topics.
Cool, you can kind
of open it up though. If there's any
yeah,
questions.
do we have any questions?
That's a great point for that. So you have been muted on the line. If you have a question, you can type it there in the chat, and then at the end we'll open up the lines in case anyone has questions that they would like to say out loud. In the meantime, go ahead and pop your questions into the conversation box. I will continue monitoring that throughout our discussions today, so feel free to ask at any time if you have a question.
And I'll start off with something. So this incident response preparedness plan, typically how long will it take to develop? Any time range?
It's more than a day, less than a year.
2 to 4 weeks.
A really, really small organization, Mark, to your point, it'll take, a week or two, to come up with.
Yeah, I mean, you'd send somebody to, or remotely, it can be delivered both ways. So you would do a bunch of kind of gathering of the evidence. What are the policies? What are the procedures? Who's part of the organization? What do you do now?
Yeah.
And then there's some assessment activity after that, where kind of a gap analysis, and then a deliverable. So
Yeah, I think the perfect IT answer is it depends.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
it depends on size or scope.
it does. The more information that a particular agency customer has to start the process, the more documentation they have, obviously would greatly reduce that process. But I think, and Mark mentioned it a little bit earlier, this is a living document. So the fact is that when you start talking about planning, preparedness, and things like that, it technically never stops.
And they can maintain it
Because
themselves.
you maintain it and it grows forever.
All right.
But to get started, short, painless as possible. Most important thing is get started somewhere. The decision to not do something, I pretty much promise you will be bitten.
All right, so the timeline and the cost will all be prepared in the proposal, depending on what
Yeah.
what
And
detail,
that's-
what size you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of the RFS, is that if you get to a point, if you want that kind of thing, simply log into the portal, put in an RFS, put it in there. Once that happens, and we contact you back, we kind of have that personal dialogue that obviously you don't have in this environment.
Right.
We have that personal dialogue. We'll come back with you with a quote, timeline, tell you what it is. We'll talk through it with your experts, and eventually you come to some agreement on what you're looking for to kind of start off biting the sandwich, so to speak, and go from there.
Good, and just to make sure just to clarify, if you're an existing customer, you'd use the request for solution, the RFS process. Otherwise, you use this external portal that many of you have already submitted requests through for new customers. Now, on the incident response services, I understand you're kind of like, you're on a retainer at no cost, unless you need to activate that.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. The industry of incident response services, Neil, has always been retainer-based. They would charge a customer upfront from a few tens of thousands of dollars to several hundreds of thousands of dollars, basically prepaid. And they sit there and wait until you have an incident, and then they show up and they spend the money, or they spend the hours that you've already paid for. With this particular program, that doesn't exist. The customer only incurs a cost once they have engaged us, asked for the help, seen the solution proposal package, had a chance to reflect, even in an emergency situation, like Mark was talking about. We're going to submit a budgetary estimate that organization could evaluate, make a conscious decision about incurring that cost before they ever actually spend any money at all.
Great, thanks for explaining that. I think that's
Thank you for pulling that out.
Good point. It's one of those things where, as was mentioned, you do your interagency agreement or interlocal contract. There's T's and C's, terms and conditions, for managed security services, but there's no money spent once you've done those contracts. You just now have the capability to activate that incident response services.
And I'll share another story, a real life story here inside the customer base. We had a customer call in thinking they had an incident, and within a few hours, they got one of our solution architects on the phone to begin to triage the incident. In the course of the discussion, we asked some questions, and they did some investigation, and they found that a server had been set up incorrectly, and it was spewing data into the network. So it was really a non-incident incident. But there was no cost to the customer. We triaged that process. In that particular case, there really wasn't anything that needed to be done. They just went over and decommissioned the server, turned it down, and everything. But had that been a true live rogue incident, we would have been able to carry forward with that solution.
Carrie, any questions? We have anything pending?
Nothing yet.
All right, let's move on.
All right, let's migrate on to the next favorite topics, risk and compliance. So risk, that's what we are all about. Identifying risk, categorizing risk, weighing risk, monetizing risk, and then putting systems and process and people in place to keep risk as low as we can as a business afford to keep it. So, Mark, let's talk a little bit about beginning at the beginning with risk assessments. That's really kind of the first thing here. Talk a little bit about the Texas Cybersecurity Framework and NIST and PCI. What are those in the context of a risk assessment?
Well, so these are pretty familiar standards, I think, to most folks in this industry. But basically, this is a list of controls or a standard that you should adhere to and measure against. These types of assessments really assess risk by giving you a baseline to work from and seeing how far or how mature you are in these various things. And so, the output of this would be giving you that baseline to measure against, being able to kind of give you, help you make better business decisions based on the assessment results.
Do I get like a letter grade? Or do you grade on
a number?
More accurately, do you grade on the curve in my case?
So yes, it is not a letter grade per se, but
okay.
Typically a number.
So you said something earlier when we were talking about incident preparedness. This reminds me of going to the doctor and getting a physical. So I go see a professional. He evaluates me against some known standards like blood pressure, heart rate, glucose levels, etc.
Sure, right.
And then I get a score. And then something else happens, though, at the end of that, right? So I get kind of like with this, don't I get some sort of like recommendation on lose 10 pounds, exercise more, live longer?
Right.
So with a risk assessment, do this, be
Right.
more secure kind of thing?
Absolutely. I mean, you get sort of this is how you remediate or this is how you get better. These are the types of things that would get you to this score. Then as a business, you have to decide, okay, is this something that we wait a couple of years now that we know that that's an issue because of the cost or the level of effort? Maybe we go after the low-hanging fruit this year. It just gives the business decision makers kind of a better and easier way to create a roadmap for future improvements.
Roadmap. So they can actually now begin to plan out into the future expenses that will make them more secure or improve their risk profile, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, right? Nobody gets to kind of micro-segmentation or like this, architecture. They're not going to change their architecture in a month and everything's going to be improved, right? That's something that takes planning, that takes, dollars. So
I go to the doctor every year for a checkup. How often do you recommend doing a risk assessment? Like every year, every other year, every 3, 5?
Well, if you've never done one, you should do one right away.
Okay, yeah, that would be a good idea. Okay.
Yeah, but it just depends. It depends on your risk tolerance, right? Every organization's different. I see these typically about every year, right? I've seen them twice a year. It just depends on where you feel you are with your risk or how dynamic or different your environment's changing. So, for instance, if it were a business that we're adding a lot of acquisitions, you may want to do this a lot more because you're bringing in a lot of risk with each one of those. Or if you have a lot of reorganization or something like that, you would want to maybe speed up the cadence.
Yeah, and one of the programs that I run is the election security assessments.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about risk assessments for elections.
Yeah, so basically what we do is we provide the assessments for the election infrastructure for all 254 counties in the state of Texas. That is our target, right? So many of these counties, which are probably very similar to agencies that will probably end up on the smaller end of the scale, haven't done one ever, right? Or if they have, it's all been done kind of internally with the resources and things that they have. But one of the biggest questions that I run across when we end up doing these assessments and having wrap-up calls that I get from customers is they turn around and they say, oh, great, what does this mean? Because one, they've never done it. Two, they've never seen results from one, so they're not sure what do I do now. And so there's a couple of discussion points that we have that we talk through a lot, and one is that we thoroughly explain what it means, right? So we go through it and say an average, you go in and find 100 plus incidents, right, or events, if you will, that are sitting out there. You need to be able to explain what those are. You got to be able to interpret them. You got to be able to understand them from a customer standpoint. But what I explain to these counties is the fact that having the assessment done is a great first step. But much to what you're talking about, Pat, if you go to the doctor and the doctor says, hey, you need to lose 10 pounds, you need to, lower your cholesterol, you need to do all this stuff. The most important thing isn't having the assessment done. The most important thing is doing something about it. Having it done and not doing anything, what's the point? Because assessments have a shelf life, like you said. How often, Mark, do you have them done? Well, it depends. Is it a year? Is it 2 years? Whatever. The point is consistency. But the main point is to consistently do something about your findings. If you don't do anything,
Why bother?
why bother? What's the point, right? So, and I never thought that would be really a topic of discussion when we started this program and we started pedaling our way through it, that was something that we would actually have to have discussions about. But that tops up,
And
quite a
Gene,
bit.
you bring up the fundamental question, why bother? Why subject your organization to a risk assessment? We talked earlier about Atlanta, $18 million, Baltimore, $11 million. There's another customer we had a call with on Friday. They have acquiesced. They've agreed to pay an unknown group $660,000 to unencrypt their 911 system. So I know why, Mark.
Yeah.
Articulate, what do you think? Why bother with the risk assessment?
Well, that's, like I said, it gives you that baseline. It gives you a starting point. It highlights where you have risk, and then collectively you can make decisions on what to do with it. Right? Sometimes you accept the risk because maybe you just have to, right? But now you have a risk management program, right, that you're flowing this into. Now you're tracking your accepted risks. You're going back to them every quarter, every year, whatever you decide the cadence to be, and you say, hey, are we still okay with this? Do we have budget allocated to eliminate this risk, or can we put a plan in place to mitigate this over the next couple of years? What do we need to do, right? So it's the remediation. It's getting you to the point where you say, you have the diet plan that Gene was talking about.
Yes.
Now you can come up with those things. Without highlighting that and shining a flashlight into the dark corners, you don't know where to start, and you're just kind of guessing. And that works okay maybe at first. Everybody knows where the big risks are, where the boogeyman is. But
Good point.
you got to shine a flashlight.
But you can burn a lot of time and a lot of revenue guessing.
Absolutely, and you could be in the wrong place, right? I'm sure all of those folks that you were mentioning with those types of attacks wish that they knew a little bit more about their risk profile and where they had issues.
So, and that's the natural evolution of the living document, Neil, that we just talked about, right? So.
Yeah. So risk assessment's the starting point. The other services, Mark, you and I were talking about just this morning. After a risk assessment, now you have some justification for conducting a penetration test. So let's kind of talk about what is a penetration test, why would I want one, and what's the possible benefit to my organization to solicit a hack?
Yeah. And so at a high level, this is an outsider's view of your environment, and it's a white hat hacker, if you will, somebody who's a quote-unquote good guy looking to do quote-unquote bad things to your network or your environment, right? So they're going to look at it just like any outsider would, whether that's a state-sponsored terrorist or just an interested party, whatever, and they're going to utilize open source tools to infiltrate your network.
Cool. So better to be hacked by friends than hacked by enemies?
Absolutely. I mean, because at least if something goes wrong with your friends, they can help you get back to.
Well, I think one of the biggest differences is if you're hacked by a good guy, they're not looking to do damage. They will stop just short of doing damage. They'll show gaps, they'll show issues, but they'll stop short of doing damage.
Sure.
If you let a bad guy in, they're not stopping. If they find that hole, they're running through it full force.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take a leap of faith then, Gene, that if you hack my system and you figure out all these holes, you're actually going to tell me, sit me down and show me how you broke into my system so I can patch up all that stuff?
Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
One word answer. Yes.
One word answer. I appreciate
Yeah, I
that.
mean,
Yeah, we're on the clock.
It's interesting because I've got a war story just about that. So we used to do a lot of different types of penetration tests, and we got to a point one time with a utility where we had access to all sorts of their control panels and switches, if you will, and we just immediately stopped the assessment right there and called them and said, this is a big problem, and we wanted to, we took a screenshot and said, we're stopping the assessment, we're not going any further because this now we could really cause harm.
Wow.
Yeah. So
We
we were
did that.
going to flick the switches, right? Somebody else might say, what's the red one do?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of next down in the tier, we've got web and mobile application testing. So as a billion mobile phones hit the world, applications followed, and now bad behavior follows mobile applications?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and everybody seems to have a phone, right? And everybody's, not everybody, but there's bring your own device policies. People get on your guest Wi-Fi, all that kind of thing. And so, when you're talking about, mobile applications, stuff that's on the phone, is it exploitable? What kind of things, bad things can happen to it? Just another assessment for something that's very common.
What mobile phones basically did was greatly increase the threat landscape.
Sure.
So you gave this much bigger area for bad guys to attack.
Oh,
it's easy to protect one fort, but if I've got 15,000 of them behind me, it's a little bigger job.
Yeah, so I put the corporate information on 15,000 devices and send them across America.
Yeah.
Lucky us. So we can actually assess those. We can test web applications. We can test mobile applications. And kind of in the same spirit, Gene, you and I were talking about penetration testing. We'll break it and then show you how we broke it so that you can then fix it.
Know how to put Humpty Dumpty back
Yeah, I mean,
together
this is a
again.
little bit more like development as security, right? So it's testing the application, it's testing the coding against, a standard typically. How sound is it? Is it securely developed? Is it easy to exploit, etc.
And that can be done for new applications that have not been rolled out yet.
That's right. It
Can
can
also
be
be done-
applications
can also
that are
be
still
done
in
for legacy,
development, right?
right?
So you run the scan against something that's in development, you get the results. Well, now you can remediate those before you actually launch live. And then again, for clients that have, something that's already live and they're interested, right? And this, it's important to get that sort of assessment done.
Absolutely.
So vulnerability scanning is different from penetration testing.
That's right.
They kind of go hand in hand, but one is perhaps more aggressive than the other, Mark? Is that kind of a simple way to describe it?
Vulnerability scanning, and to me, is getting an insider's view and sometimes external view, or both, of vulnerabilities on your footprint, right? So internally, you're scanning every IP or segments of your network that you're concerned with, and then getting the reporting back that says these are the vulnerabilities we've detected based on the threat feeds that we've ingested. This gives you a real good look at things that you need to remediate. So it's just another way to plan for remediations in your network.
Yeah. Well, on the way in, I noticed a bunch of clouds out there. So I looked as hard as I could, and I didn't see a computer in one. But more and more applications are, in fact, moving to the cloud. More and more organizations. I was talking to one recently in the Rio Grande Valley. They were down to one premise-based application. Everything else was vendor-hosted or cloud-based. So didn't I just transfer all my headaches to the vendor in the cloud when I gave them my work? Mark?
I would say no, you have not transferred all of your headaches.
Okay.
Some of them you have, of course, but as the data owner, you're still liable if something happens to the data, right? So
Okay.
depending on what type of data it is, PII, HIPAA, whatever it is, you're still going to be liable for any sort of breach. Even if you weren't, you're still going to be publicly, it's going to be a publicity for you.
Okay, so yeah, even though it's your cloud, it's my data, right? I'm hearing you saying.
That's right.
So if your cloud breaks, or if someone breaks into your cloud, I may still be held legally liable. So a regulatory agency in theory could come after me,
Yep.
and then whatever's left of me would come after you, assuming?
Yeah.
I have anything left to come after you with then? Okay. So cloud compliance assessments then, I guess that's what we do then. We evaluate the CSP, the cloud service provider, its network, its architecture, connectivity, rules, regulations, people, process, all of the above?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So as we move more and more compute into the cloud, that's going to become more and more important to people, I would imagine.
Definitely.
Okay. Good. Well, Neil, I think we've kind of hit the highlights here. There's a lot more war stories that we could tell, or there's stuff we could make up that people would think was believable, but we'll pass on that. Let us hand the baton back to you, because we had alluded earlier to how to get an ILC or
Yes.
an IAC in. So maybe we want to tell the people a little more about that.
Great. By the way, any questions? Anything come in yet? All right, I just want to
Silence.
ask then one. I want to say, without conclusive evidence, but without numbers, but I think penetration testing is probably the most popular service offering that Shared Technology Services provides right now. All right, have you reached 200 yet?
We're getting close.
All right, so this big celebration thrown
Not
by
quite there, but
AT&T,
we're,
Yeah, happy 200.
200th customer.
yeah, we're getting close,
Penetration
very
testing.
close.
So good. I mean, you know, it's not like everybody's got one, you should get one too, but if nearly 200 customers have conducted a penetration testing with Shared Technology Services, there's something right about that. All right, so we encourage you, if you haven't done your penetration test, or you did it so long ago, it's time to do another one. Take a look at that. Maybe that's sometimes the first place people have started, and then with that penetration test or the assessment or the incident response plan, now you get a list of things, or there was your diagnostics, here's what we recommend in the future, and you can start to prioritize some of these other service offerings. I know we didn't talk about web application firewalls, but that's like one of my favorites. If I've got a public-facing portal, I want something that, that has a firewall that's strong, that can prevent those needless hammering, 1,000 hits a minute or something like that. So anyways, those types of services, it's not just the popularity, it's probably the sequence of what you do first.
A good point, Neil. Yes, exactly. The more we expose to the giant public internet out there, the more we open ourselves up to the hacking community that is, at last count, about a $6 trillion industry. So we would like to not contribute to their economic development, maybe turn some of those funds back into Texas where we can grow our own state.
Yeah, and for the folks on the phone as well, is that if they look into funding sources for this, specifically DIR, as we're going in and doing this, we're already into planning for 2020. So we're already looking at setting folks up using the 2020 funding plan for DIR right now. So it's what, June?
Yeah.
So we're
June.
that far ahead of schedule.
another minute.
We're that, yeah, right, for another minute, right?
Yeah.
So we're already that far ahead of schedule, so to speak, because of the demand, as you pointed out, has been such at a high level.
It's good.
So we're already there at 2020, but sooner you ask, sooner you get involved, then
Looking forward to that 200th penetration.
it'll be a good day. I can take a breath and
Well together, Neil.
I'm glad you put this in. I do want to, we'll talk about the request for solution process here in a little bit, but if you do have an incident, call the service desk. All right, if it's a security incident, call it right there. That's the number. They'll get you in touch with the right people, and that way it's, a major incident response team is assembled, and most likely these guys will be part of that. All right, anything else you want to cover?
Really, I just the last one here, Neil. In summation, throughout all of these services, there are some common themes. One is they are a service. They're not a gadget, a widget, a product. They're not a bucket of things that we drop off on your doorstep and wish you luck. They're all services. They're available in like a subscription model, so you can subscribe to a month's worth of something or a year's worth of something. They're all customized. So to Mark's point earlier, a incident response plan could be 3 pages for one organization and 300 for another. So highly customized. Whatever you need is what we'll work to develop These are all managed throughout the life cycle. So as we provide a service like penetration testing and vulnerability scanning, we're managing that throughout however long that relationship lasts. And then lastly, just another shameless plug, Neil. This is all requested through the STS portal. It is the single most information-packed and simple-to-use tool I've ever experienced. It's awesome.
We got that recorded, didn't we?
Yes, we do.
I want to make sure we get that. The customer said. All right, so let me move on how to get more information. First of all, this is our external portal. Most of you probably use that. Especially if you're a city, county, state, higher education, those are new customers or new eligible customers, and we want them to actually get as much information as they can. If you are an existing customer, a current customer, with internal portal credentials, then use the internal portal. But if you don't have those internal portal credentials, or you're still haven't joined the club or not part of the country club, as Patrick said, then the external portal is there for you to click, and you can see some of those service offerings, managed security services there on the bottom left or close to the left. If you look at the service offerings page, you'll see the beginning of the hierarchy here of some of those service offerings, how they're divided. What we talked about today included the incident response and risk compliance. Each of these areas has like a one-pager information to get more information, or to at least recite some of the facts that are there. When you're ready, and like I said, if you don't have those internal credentials or you are a new customer, please submit that request for more information. You fill out the contact information on the left, use that pull-down menu to select the service offering, and the specific as you get, you can put any more details there. That is routed to the appropriate people. So if you're looking for any of the things we talked about today, it'll be sent to this group.
But you can only pick one.
One per,
You can ask just one at a time.
Right.
You can put in 3. That's just how we designed it. It's one of those things. In case you put in like 14, and then we couldn't put 14 tickets together or something like that.
And if you asked for things that were different providers, it wouldn't know how to send the right thing to the right place.
There is one that says multiple services, and that comes.
Then you can just put it, yeah.
Is that like all of the above?
I'm not advocating now, because then I have to figure out what you really.
We ended up having to put in a ticket to fix the one we
ticket,
put in.
yeah.
Yes.
So, as was mentioned, there's the Interagency Contract. If you're a state agency, you're needing to work with DIR. That is what you would fill out. The ILC, and these are all in the external portal, is for interlocal contracts. So anybody not an agency goes in the ILC. That just sets up the conduit on how you agree to pay for services with DIR. Then the program terms and conditions for managed security services. There is a dedicated terms and conditions. That's just another part of those contracts. If you went into DCS, if you went into print mail, you'd have a different terms and conditions than the managed security services. Now, nothing gets spent, nothing is charged until you get a solution offering, and that's the solution terms there at the bottom, and we kind of call that the request for service because it gives you your timeline, your proposal, your cost. Only after you approve that would there be any type of obligation for payment of services.
So that's not during the Q&A, so to speak, during the RFS. That's at the end of the RFS when you
Correct.
actually have an acceptance.
Yes. Nothing, I mean, you can talk about, I hate to say it, but yeah, they could actually use you to scope out their, next year's project plans. And if you decided you had something that looks good, they could reject it all, but keep it.
Absolutely.
But that's how we want to make sure we do the business. We want to make sure we get that business. All right, Carrie, service offering of the month.
All right, that means we're almost done. I know, because I'm always at the very, very end here, which is to tell you about the service offerings of the month, which you obviously have heard about because you're already here with us. You'll see that our service offering of the month of June was Managed Security Services, which was the extension of our offering back in April. We have now completed an offering webinar for all of our primary towers. So in July, next month, we will be featuring I was going to say expose, but that's not really right, is it? We'll be featuring a behind-the-scenes talk on the multi-sourcing services integrator, which is us, Capgemini. And we'll be talking a little bit about what we offer as the oversight for governance in the program, the STS program. And we look forward to sharing that information with you next month. We do record all of those webinars, and they are, we're working towards getting them all posted in our portal. At the external link that Neil showed you earlier, you will see a link to publications, and that's where the recordings will be. You also know that you have the ability to subscribe to our mailing list. The mailing list is how you would have received the notifications about this webinar, but if you would like to receive the actual invitations to the webinars, you have to go one step further to subscribe using that box that you'll see there. There is a link in the footer on our webpage, and it is a little confusing sometimes because you may be receiving the regular emails, but if you don't take that extra step to come and subscribe, then you won't receive the Outlook invitations to these webinars. I think, is that my last slide there?
That is. We are concluded here. I will mention that we will not be sending out any emails or conducting any business for like webinars and things like that during the first week of July, but we will start back up the second week and finish up the webinar by the end of July.
Right, mentally I think we're already all on 4th of July vacation, right? So next week we're just checking out.
So I want to thank Patrick, Mark, Jean, Carrie for putting together the webinar today. And if there's not any other questions,
not a single one.
then I appreciate everybody's time and attendance. And thank you very much.
Let's actually unmute the lines just in case we have any phone joiners who might have any questions. That gives them the opportunity. So if you are on the phone, I am about to unmute you, and be ready. Why isn't it giving me the option here? Oh, here it is. All right, be ready to be unmuted. And there we go. You should now have the ability to unmute yourself if you have any questions. We will give that 1 or 2 more moments, and otherwise, everyone have a great day.